Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me once again Dan Oliver of Mermekin Capital. Thanks for joining me, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
It's really good to have you with me, and I want to get your comments about these volatile markets. As Michael Oliver said, it's not like watching paint dry anymore, even with the dollar, which had been boring. And so things are starting to happen. Things are starting to shake loose in the markets, and I want to ask you about that. But we have titled today's show Lenin Think, and that's after a recent essay that you wrote. And before we go any further, Dan, is there a way that people can be on your list to get these essays that you write from time to time? It's not any particular schedule, but I guess whenever you feel there's something you'd like your clients to know about, is there some way that people be put on a list to get this?
Yes, Jay, they can go to my website, which is myrmikan.com, MYRMIKAN, and there's a sign-up sheet, the button right there, and sign up. And I generally do them. Used to do them once a month. Now it's more once a quarter. But you're right. When the spirit moves, I do a letter when it's appropriate.
Well, certainly when times get exciting, I would imagine the spirit may move more frequently. So people may want to, because your insights are very valuable, and that's why, of course, we have you on the show. But so I want to ask you about all these different efforts to try to get Trump out of office. The Democrats have been hammering away one thing after another with their friends in the left-wing media at CNN and MSNBC, and they went ahead after Trump with the Russian hoax, which Trump calls it, and I tend to think that's what Mueller revealed, that it was pretty much a hoax. But they went ahead with it, even though some of the FBI agents, at least one of them, concluded that there was no there there. I generally don't like to talk about politics on this show, because the purpose of this show is to help people understand what is actually taking place in the markets, as opposed to what Wall Street propagandists might want us to believe is happening. And yourself, Alistair McLeod, and many other free market thinkers that we have on this show understand that when politicians try to defy Mother Nature to win votes, it impacts markets, but in a way that isn't good generally. So there are reasons, though, at times to discuss politics, and I think that your February 13th article was just really spot on in terms of summarizing the efforts to take Trump out of office, even though he was duly elected. I'd start out reading a quote from your article on February 13th. You said, and I quote, "Those trying to make sense of impeachment proceedings need look no further than Gary Morrison's article titled Lenin Think. It was written in October 2019 edition of News and Criterion. The Democrats' strategy followed Lenin's advice completely. Quote, first, let's stick the convict's badge on him, and then after that, we'll examine his case." End of quote. So even before Trump was a Republican candidate, you point out there were those who were trying to find ways to impeach him or to make sure he doesn't get in office. And you noted that initially they wanted to do that on the basis that he was a businessman, and as a president, he would use his he couldn't be trusted because he's a businessman. He would probably try to do bad things to the common folks, to the people. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that idea?
Yeah. But should I step back a little bit? The article about Trump here wasn't really meant to be about politics, about which political parties. But I have views about that, of course. But that wasn't the point. The point was to examine the institutions that all sides are supposed to agree on, right? I mean, you go to your school and there's this cultural glue that holds us together. We believe in the Constitution, the Supreme Court, and all these agents, all these things, all the government. And we may not like how it works, but at least we agree with the basic structure. And that's what's kept America strong for so long. Sure. We don't have huge civil wars over the nature of government. And the point of the article is to show that the left really, in their zeal to go after Trump, actively and knowingly undermined these institutions, these core institutions, which reveals what we already know, which is they don't care about the institutions, but they care about his power and getting their way, which is what the Bolsheviks cared about in Russia. Now, I wouldn't say the Democrats are Bolsheviks, but the point is it's the same strategy where you want to wipe out all the existing structures and take complete power for yourself. And that's what they were engaged in.
Right.
And that's why it didn't matter the relevance, whether it was true or not that Trump did these things, or whether they were illegal or not. I mean, you can be a bad guy, do bad things, and if it's not illegal, you can disapprove of it, but you can't do anything legally about it. But they didn't care about any of that.
Yeah.
They went after him on spurious grounds. And the first thing you mentioned, where it wasn't just he was a businessman, they said, well, because he would benefit, because the state is so large, the government influences every business there is. So if you're running the government and you have business, by definition, you're in a capacity to help yourself, and therefore that is inherently corrupt. And so that was the first article they floated. It was a specific thing, which is he was going to, his financial holdings, by definition, made him an interested party in government, so therefore he couldn't serve. And it's an extraordinary thing to say, because what it really says is that only the political class is eligible for office. Anybody else who has any other interest is constitutionally barred from the office, which again is I think they probably think that, but it's an incredible thing to say. And the second one was very silly as well, which is the foreign emoluments clause, which says the president can't benefit from foreign leaders, and apparently a Chinese bank rents space in the Trump Tower as if that benefits him greatly, and that would corrupt him, just that fact alone. And also diplomats stay in his hotel in Washington. I mean, these are absolutely absurd things, but it shows how nutty the left was in their zeal to go after him. These didn't go anywhere, and so they had to come up with something else, and that's where the Russian hoax story came about.
They keep coming up with things. So when Nancy Pelosi talks about our founding fathers and
praying for everybody,
and praying for everybody, and how she worships the Constitution, and yet we're seeing the Democrats really wanting to get rid of things like 2 senators from every state, or the Electoral College, things that were designed to keep us from becoming a democracy, essentially, or a mobocracy that would allow 51%. To do whatever they wanted to do to the 49% that doesn't agree with them.
Well, that's right, Jane. Don't forget, the founding fathers were very aware of history, and they knew that the Greek experiment with democracy really hadn't worked, and the answer is because the mob is fickle, and the 51% would think one thing one day and something else the next day. And this is all in the history books. And so that's why they specifically did not want a democracy. They wanted a republic. And the whole point of the Constitution is that the populists in the House, which were elected every 2 years by population, by district, that would represent populism, would never get along with the aristocracy in the Senate, which was 6 years. And originally, senators were not elected by popular vote. They were elected by state legislatures. Mm-hmm. They would be very far removed from population. The idea is they would never agree, and so they would do very little. And then if they ever did agree to get a bill passed, the president, who again would withdraw from the whole country, would have the opportunity to veto it. Mm-hmm. And so, the whole idea that I grew up with, and still that there's gridlock in Washington, this is a bad thing. No, this is a feature, not a bug. And the idea is, even if the president went along with this, the Supreme Court could show up and say, no, that's unconstitutional. So the whole point was to temper the temptation to use government to gain a stranglehold on power over everybody else, and it worked pretty well for a long time. But starting with the New Deal, especially, all those safeguards have been slowly chipped away, and now we see in the investigations of Trump, and also, as the letter goes on to point out, in the campaign promises of the current Democratic field, a self-conscious effort to undermine these institutional safeguards that has prevented the United States from doing the crazy things that other countries do when they get in a midst of a populist fervor.
No, well, yeah. So while Ms. Pelosi speaks about her reverence for the Constitution, she seems not to be bothered by the desires to unravel it. Dan, people like myself who pay a lot of attention to what's going on probably know a lot of this, but most people aren't really that familiar. That's why I thought your piece on Lenin Think was so valuable, because I think it really sort of summarized what was going on with the Russian investigation. Talk to us a little bit about that, and why Trump is probably right in calling it a hoax.
Well, just briefly, there were 2 separate distinct origins for this. One was a low-level Trump campaign employee who was told by a shady Maltese professor that the Russians had Hillary's missing emails. You recall that Hillary broke all sorts of laws by not allowing her emails when she was Secretary of State to be on State Department servers.
Right.
Apparently the Russians had this, which is a Hillary wrongdoing. And then the Russians were going to release these things, which they should have been anyway, to help the campaign. This campaign employee said that right after he was told that, his quote was, he started being treated like Marilyn Monroe by U.S. intelligence sources. Embassy officials in London took him to dinner and asked him about it. And then there was a professor named Stephen Halper who paid him $3,000 to write a paper about foreign affairs and cornered him in a bar in London to ask him about the Russians and the emails, again, hoping to entrap him. He would say something. And he told, it's on record, he told Halper that Trump had nothing to do with Russia at all. And then an Israeli intelligence asset arranged a meeting between him and the Australian ambassador to London, and that's the meeting where he said that he'd been told this, and the Australian ambassador immediately called the FBI and said that this fellow had told him that Russians had the email and were going to release it, and that's when the FBI launched their investigation. But they did so knowing that there was all sorts of information that suggested this was not true. This was rumor that this wasn't coming from the campaign. It was coming from a third party source, which again they knew because they had the conversations on record from Halper. So they launched this investigation, and they did it in order to get the FISA court to allow them to go wiretap Trump's senior campaign managers.
Right.
This was basically an inside job. They knew how the system worked. They didn't just go do it. It'd be too bold just simply to spy on the Trump campaign. You need a pretext. So this was the pretext that they came up with. And the other one which everyone knows about, of course, is the Christopher Steele report where he paid, or he says he paid, Russian informants to come up with all sorts of allegations which turned out not to be true. And this thing was paid for by the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. And what's extraordinary is that the Inspector General's report demonstrates that the FBI agents knew that this had been paid for by the DNC. And then what they did was the author, Steele, took some of these details, leaked them to a reporter at Yahoo News who published them, and the FBI went to the court and said, see, look, there's corroboration. We had this report. It's in the news media. Of course, the report was the source, so it was not corroboration. They claimed it was. And so they got, so that was another element they used to get the warrants to go tap Trump's campaign officials. And again, this isn't just a Republican talking point. The Inspector General demonstrated that the FBI knew that these things were related in their applications, and they did it anyway. And what's incredible is, as you know, and this isn't in the letter, but some of the Trump associates have been sent to jail because in interviews with the FBI, they misremembered a date, or they said they didn't meet someone when they did. They're very sort of, I mean, maybe technical. You shouldn't. Technical process crimes, they call them. And here the FBI has been demonstrated by the government itself to engage in much worse practices. And, of course, there's absolutely no repercussion whatsoever because they work for the government.
Well, Dan, if this continues, you can't help but think this could cause us to spiral down into some sort of just an ungodly totalitarian type of power-grabbing country. I mean,
I think that's right, Jay, and it's important to remember, and people forget, as totalitarian as the Soviet Union was and East Germany was, they still had processes. They didn't just come to your house and take you away, and they did do that, but they would have a court order first. Now, the court was a kangaroo court, a banana court, and you sort of wonder, why did they go through the effort? Why did they just come shoot you? Why do they need to have that theater? And there's some deep-seated need for legitimacy, and that's effectively what the FBI and the intelligence agencies did against Trump. Was they used these procedures, and so to your point, having established that they can pick a goal first and then figure out a process to get there. It's what's scary is that they were able to do this when they were in the opposition, when Trump was president. Imagine the power they're going to have if and when a left-wing president comes back in, and there will be absolutely no oversight. And they'll know that, no oversight against what they can do. And we've seen it. The first hints of that was when Obama was president, and they told all the right-wing nonprofits that they were losing their tax status.
Right.
I mean, it's not
exactly.
jail, something, but just using the power of government to squelch opposition, to put pressure on people, to audit people you don't like. I mean, all that is low-level harassment, but it makes a big difference. It makes people not want to give money to certain causes, and so it constrains free speech, and it's very damaging. And again, I think it's different. It differs by degree for what happened behind the Iron Curtain, but it's really not different by kind. The idea is you're using political power to shut up your enemies and keep them in line.
So, Dan, with just 4 minutes left, and I want to ask you about a brief comment on the markets, but what do you think is behind this? Is it ideology? Is it just an attempt for a power grab by the Democrats?
It's power, right? I mean, it's straight power, and the crux of the point is that the two articles of impeachment, which were obstructing Congress because the Trump administration didn't hand over documents and Congress didn't bother to go to the courts to demand them, which all Congress have done, and abuse of power they're not crimes, and the Constitution says that impeachment has to be for a high crime and misdemeanor. So what's extraordinary to me is that the entire Democratic, except I think for two representatives, politicians voted for something which is blatantly on its face not constitutional, and so just again it shows you that there's no support for these institutions, and what the candidates want to do is pass the Supreme Court, where they say Kavanaugh was legitimate because they manufactured accusations against him, and so it's FDR, as your listeners might remember, wanted to pat the court in the 30s, get his New Deal, his unconstitutional New Deal through, and his allies said no because again they supported the institutions more than political power. It was so important for them to maintain the structure of government the way it is, and the new left just does not care about that. They just want power, and they'll do what they can to get it. And it's very scary because if and when they get it, and they all think demographics means they will get it eventually, and they may well be right, it'll be a very different country than it is today.
Well, it certainly seems the Democrats have. These are sort of the kind of thuggery that they've taken that they've employed to try to get rid of Trump is taking it a step beyond anything that FDR did. Well, it's just a minute left. Quick comment on the markets. I mean, here we are. I'm seeing the Dow is down another 800 points right now at this moment. Gold is up over $50. Tell us what your thoughts are about the market.
So quickly, the way QE usually works is the Fed prints money and gives it to the banks, which form reserves, and they go lever up those reserves to go lend to businesses to build buildings and do things, and that creates jobs and it creates demand for commodities, all those things. Now, that's a bad thing because you get overcapacity and it collapses later, but at least you get that sugar high. And what's happening now is this virus has shut down key components of supply chains. So if you have a product that has 30 components and one doesn't show up, you can't make your product. And no amount of money printing can solve that problem. So I think that in this case, what's going to happen is the money printing is not going to be pro-market negative gold, which it always has been in the past. This is debasement. Trump announced the federal government is going to pay for all the coronavirus testing, which is great. Maybe they should do it, but with what money? And the answer is they'll issue a treasury bond, the Fed will buy it, they use the money for current consumption, current expenditure. This is a very different thing. So I think we're moving from a QE credit bubble scenario into a money printing debasement scenario, which will be very negative financial assets and very positive gold.
All right. We'll have to leave it go at that. Thank you so much, Dan, for being with us. Your insights are always valued, and we'll look to do it again sometime in the near term.
Thanks for having me.